I woke up to war. Not the kind with sirens or news alerts, but the kind that hits you in the gut the moment you see your prize-winning rose bushes hacked to stumps. I stood there barefoot in my robe, staring at the massacre, petals strewn across my front lawn like a crime scene. My name's Dane Atwell. I'm a mechanic by trade, and I've lived in Willow Creek Hills for 9 years. Never had a problem with anyone until Teresa Thornby moved in 3 doors down and got herself elected to the HOA board. Typical middle-aged control freak, always in everyone's business, always clutching that HOA handbook like it was the Constitution. My roses? They've been around longer than her backyard patio extension, which, by the way, violates at least 3 HOA codes. But I never reported it. I wasn't that guy. Until last night. I knew it was her. She's been on my case for weeks. First it was my truck being too loud in the driveway. Then it was how the red of my roses clashed with a neighborhood pallet. I laughed her off until this morning when I found every last one of them butchered. I crouched down and touched the splintered stems. Clean cuts. Someone used shears. "Morning, Dane." Teresa's voice chirped from her porch like a mosquito in July. She wore a pastel tracksuit and held a coffee mug that said 1 HOA chairwoman. I swear, she was smirking behind that mug. "You see what happened here?" I asked, loud enough for neighbors to hear. She squinted over her sunglasses. "Oh dear. Vandalism? That's a shame. Maybe if you'd chosen a more appropriate plant species." I walked away before I said something I'd regret. But I didn't go inside. I went to the side of my house, opened the utility box by the AC unit, and pulled out the SD card from the security cam I'd installed 2 weeks ago. I'd gotten tired of her creeping around my yard during her inspections, and let's just say I had a feeling. I popped the card into my laptop and fast-forwarded through the night. There she was. Midnight. Hood up. Gloves on. She crept into my yard with a pair of garden shears. She moved like she'd done it before. I watched her snip, yank, and stomp, then tiptoe back across the lawn like some suburban ninja. I laughed dry and bitter. She really thought she was untouchable. By noon, I was sitting in the HOA meeting room at the clubhouse. Every board member was present. Teresa sat at the center chair, flipping through her binder like she was supreme judge of the neighborhood. "Before we begin," I said, plugging my laptop into the projector, "I have something to share." She looked up, clearly annoyed. "This isn't on the agenda, Dane." "It is now," I said, and hit play. The room went silent. The footage rolled. One board member gasped. Another muttered, "Is that Teresa?" When the clip ended, I turned to face the room. "I want this on record. Teresa Thornby trespassed on my property and destroyed private landscaping. I'm submitting this to the city, and I'm requesting her immediate removal from the HOA board." Teresa's face drained of color. "This is absurd." "You want absurd? You destroyed property because you didn't like the color of my flowers." Chairman Rowland, the one guy on the board who didn't seem to be under her thumb, cleared his throat. "Teresa, we'll need to discuss this. Privately." She stood up like she was about to storm out, but I stopped her cold. "Oh, and Teresa?" I turned to her as the board members looked on. "I've already sent the footage to the city's code enforcement. You're not just losing your chair. You're getting charged." By the following morning, Teresa's nameplate had vanished from the HOA office door. I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. The neighborhood grapevine took care of that. And by noon, her little circle of clipboard loyalists had gone quiet. The type of quiet that signals someone just realized their queen bee was actually a termite. I spent the day in my garage with the radio humming low, working on the transmission of a '72 Chevelle. Grease was good therapy. But around 3, I noticed a white city vehicle pull up to my curb. A man in khakis and a button-down stepped out, clipboard in hand, badge visible on his belt. Not code enforcement, this was someone else. "Mr. Atwell?" he asked, approaching. "Yeah?" "Detective Ray Mullins. I'm with the city's property crimes unit. Mind if I ask you a few questions about the incident you submitted video for?" My jaw tightened. "Didn't think it'd go that far." "It did," he said, flipping through his notes. "Turns out this isn't the first complaint involving Ms. Thornby. Most were dismissed insufficient evidence. Yours, however, was airtight." I wiped my hands and motioned toward the folding chairs by the garage. You're telling me she's done this before? He's Saturday, not just property damage. There's a pattern. We've got reports of altered HOA citations, tampered ballots for board elections, even a claim that she rerouted community maintenance funds to a landscaping company owned by her nephew. That stopped me cold. She's been funneling HOA money? Allegedly, he said. We're still confirming documentation. But your footage opened the door. We got a warrant to seize her HOA laptop earlier today. It's already yielded data logs that contradict the official records submitted for the last budget cycle. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. So this is bigger than my roses. Much bigger, he said. And we wouldn't have had cause to pursue it without that video. You planning any civil action? Wasn't until now. You'd be within your rights. She violated trespass laws, destroyed private property, and misused her position to orchestrate it. He passed me a business card and stood. If you want to talk to a DA, let me know. You're not the only resident we'll be speaking to. After he left, I walked the property again. The rose bushes were still a mess, stumps and broken stems, but now they looked less like a loss and more like evidence. Proof that the rot wasn't just in the soil. That evening, I drove down to the community center for the special HOA meeting the board scheduled in light of recent events. The room was packed, standing room only. Old-timers, young couples, even the reclusive guy from the corner lot who never came to anything. They all showed up. Roland, now acting chair, stood at the podium. We're opening tonight's meeting to resident concerns, he said. Given the circumstances, transparency is our priority. A woman near the front raised her hand. What's being done to audit the HOA finances? Roland adjusted his glasses. We've contacted a third-party CPA firm. They'll conduct a full audit, not just for this year, but the prior two. Any irregularities will be turned over to the city. Another man stood. Why weren't we told about the complaints against Teresa earlier? Roland hesitated. Some members of the previous board dismissed them internally. That won't happen again. We're revising the bylaws to require resident notification for all formal complaints going forward. From the back of the room, a voice rang out. Dane, you got anything to say? I didn't plan to speak. But now that I was on my feet, I didn't stop myself. I didn't want to be the guy with the camera, I began. But when someone starts treating their position like a throne, silence just makes it worse. Heads nodded. She trespassed, destroyed property, and used her title to bully neighbors. But the worst part? She made it normal, like we were all supposed to accept it. We didn't and we won't. That's why we're here. There was scattered applause. Not loud, just enough to feel the shift. After the meeting, a woman approached me carrying a manila folder. I recognized her, Cindy, the retired nurse from 2 streets over. I've got something you should see, she said. I used to be on the board. Until I resigned last year. I opened the folder. Inside were scanned letters, email printouts, and minutes from meetings that never showed up in public records. One memo in particular caught my eye. It was a flagged transaction showing a $5,000 payment to a landscaping contractor for emergency median replanting. The signature authorizing it? Teresa Thornby. I flipped through more pages. There were at least 7 similar payments over 6 months, all just under the amount that would require board-wide approval. She kept it below the radar, I muttered. She knew exactly what she was doing, Cindy said. I tried to raise it last year. She shut me down, said I was too emotional to serve. I looked up. Would you be willing to speak to the detective? She didn't hesitate. Already did. But I figure the more eyes on this, the better. When I got home that night, I didn't sleep. I compiled the documents from Cindy, scanned everything, and forwarded it to Detective Mullins. I also uploaded the files to a private drive and shared access with Roland and 2 other board members I now trusted. By the end of the week, the city had frozen the HOA's discretionary spending accounts pending the audit. Teresa's nephew's company? Already under investigation for bid rigging. And the best part? The City Council scheduled a public hearing to discuss possible state oversight of Willow Creek Hills HOA operations. But the real turning point came when the local news picked up the story. They led with the footage-grainy night vision video of Teresa creeping into my yard with shears in hand. It cut to interviews with residents, including Cindy and 2 others who admitted they'd been too afraid to speak up until now. Then came the headline, HOA chairwoman under criminal investigation for property crimes and financial fraud. That afternoon, I got a call from a civil litigation attorney named Greg Sandoval. He lived in the next neighborhood over and had been watching the story unfold. "Mr. Atwell," he said, "I specialize in HOA law. If you're considering a class action with other residents, I'd be happy to volunteer my services. No fees unless we win." I didn't answer right away. He added, "People like her count on intimidation. You stopped that. Now it's time to make sure it doesn't start again." I met with him the next morning. Within days, we had 15 plaintiffs signed on, each with a story, falsified notices, retaliatory fines, ignored maintenance requests, and in 2 cases, threats of lien filings based on non-existent violations. The case moved fast. The evidence was overwhelming, and the judge granted us discovery access to 5 years of HOA records. What we found was worse than anyone guessed. Teresa had been manipulating bids, inflating costs, and awarding contracts to friends and relatives in exchange for kickbacks disguised as consulting fees. The court froze her personal assets pending outcome. Her nephew's company folded within a week. But the most satisfying moment? Watching her walk into court flanked by 2 public defenders, no longer the queen of the cul-de-sac. No binder. No pastel suit. Just someone finally held accountable. After the hearing, I stepped outside into the sunlight. A few neighbors were gathered nearby. One handed me a small potted rose bush. "Thought you might want a head start," she said. I chuckled. "Yeah, time to plant something new." I didn't expect to be back in a courtroom so soon. But there I was, seated behind the plaintiff's table with Greg Sandoval flipping through exhibits while the bailiff called order. The civil case was in motion, but a parallel criminal investigation had grown teeth. What started as 1 count of property damage had unraveled into a full-blown racketeering probe. The district attorney's office filed charges against Teresa Thornby for wire fraud, abuse of fiduciary duty, and obstruction of municipal oversight. A grand jury handed down the indictment just 24 hours before this hearing. It wasn't just her anymore either. 3 former board members were now persons of interest. The city even appointed a temporary oversight administrator to manage Willow Creek Hills HOA functions until the internal structure could be rebuilt. Greg leaned toward me and whispered, "We're going to file a motion requesting a forensic audit of every financial transaction she signed off on since her appointment. If even half of these numbers don't add up, she'll be looking at restitution on top of prison time." The judge called a recess, and I stepped into the hallway to stretch. 2 reporters stood nearby, quietly talking to a man in a navy blazer who looked too polished to be a neighbor. He glanced my way and approached. "You're Atwell?" he asked, extending a hand. "Name's Marcus Delaney. I manage HOA oversight for the state inspector's office. Been watching this situation unfold. Didn't expect state involvement," I said. "You lit a fire under the right people. Happens more than you'd think, but rarely with this much evidence. The fact that she fabricated citations and siphoned off community funds while simultaneously intimidating residents? That's textbook misappropriation and coercive governance. We're considering broad reforms." "Reforms?" He nodded. "Mandatory third-party audits for HOAs over a certain size. Term limits for board members. And possibly a registry of sanctioned individuals barred from serving on any HOA board again." That last part caught me off guard. "You're blacklisting her?" "We call it a governance exclusion list. If someone abuses community authority for personal gain, they don't get to do it again 2 zip codes over." Back inside, Greg presented motion after motion. Teresa's defense team tried to delay, claiming stress and lack of access to counsel due to the speed with which charges mounted. The judge denied the delay. She wasn't buying it. After court adjourned, I walked to the parking lot and found Cindy waiting beside her car with a heavy binder under her arm. "Found more," she said. "Meeting minutes from 3 years ago. They never made it into the official record. But look here." She flipped it open and pointed to a page marked with a sticky tab. It detailed a vote to approve a new landscaping contract for the community park. According to the notes, the vote failed 4-3, but the contract was still approved days later. She backdated a new vote summary and filed that version, Cindy said. "The original was shredded. I only found this copy because I kept my own archive. Habit from working in the hospitals, never trust a single file." I scanned the page. Near the bottom, in faint pencil, was a note. "Board members instructed not to discuss vote discrepancy. Directives from chair." "Who wrote that?" I asked. "Paul Granger. He resigned a month after this meeting. Said nothing, moved out, left no forwarding address." That name rang a bell. I remembered Paul, a quiet guy, always wore corduroy and ran the neighborhood book exchange box. His sudden departure had seemed random back then. Greg added the document to our growing case file. The next day, Teresa's house was swarming with city officials. Not a raid, not yet. But they served a search warrant and began cataloging documents from her garage. Boxes of HOA paperwork, external hard drives, even old email correspondence printed and filed manually. Sloppy. She never expected anyone to pull the thread. I walked past with my toolbox, heading to a neighbor's place to help patch drywall. Several residents stood nearby, watching. Nobody said a word. But a few nodded silent solidarity. Later that afternoon, I met with Greg and the other plaintiffs in a borrowed conference room at the public library. We had a list of demands: reimbursement for bogus fines, repayment of misused funds into the community maintenance budget, and the permanent dissolution of the current HOA board. "Can we do that?" one neighbor asked. "Can we just dissolve the whole thing?" "If the majority of the community votes for it," Greg replied. "Yes. You'll need to replace it with a management company or reestablish under a new charter. But first, we need to get through the hearings." A man from the back spoke up. "What happens if she cuts a deal? Walks away without jail time?" Greg tapped the table twice. "Then we make sure the civil penalties follow her. She won't walk away owning a dime of this neighborhood." 2 days later, I was summoned to testify in front of a state panel reviewing administrative abuse within homeowner associations. I wasn't the only one. Cindy was scheduled after me, along with 3 other residents who had remained quiet until now. I wore my work jeans, boots, and a button-down. No suit. I wasn't here to impress anyone, just to tell the truth. "Mr. Atwell," said the chairperson, a sharp-eyed woman with a binder full of notes. "You submitted footage that sparked this investigation. Could you explain, in your own words, what compelled you to install that camera in the first place?" I kept my voice steady. She treated the community like her private kingdom. People stopped speaking up because they were afraid of retaliation. I wasn't, but I also knew talking wouldn't be enough. I needed proof. They asked about the timeline, the evidence chain, the way she manipulated enforcement selectively. I gave them names, dates, documents. Every word I said was backed up by something in that binder. When I finished, the chairperson closed her notes and looked up. "We believe this case may justify legislative reform," she said. "You've done more than defend your own rights, Mr. Atwell. You've exposed a systemic failure." Outside the chamber, I met Cindy again. Her testimony had been sharp, precise. She even read an old email aloud, one in which Teresa had instructed her to learn to look the other way when reviewing expense reports. That line made them sit up, she said. They weren't expecting her to be that bold in writing. Greg called later that night. The city attorney wants to settle. They're offering full reimbursement to all plaintiffs, plus a community restoration fund. But there's a catch. What's that? They want you to sign an agreement not to pursue punitive damages personally. No, he paused. Are you sure? You'd still be getting a payout. I didn't do this for money. I did it so nobody else has to stare at a pile of rose petals and wonder if they're next. We declined the offer. The trial proceeded into its third week. Teresa's defense strategy fell apart once the forensic audit revealed over $70,000 in unapproved contracts. Her co-defendants turned on her to save themselves, each one trading testimony for lighter sentencing. The judge handed down her sentence, 3 years of prison followed by mandatory restitution payments and a 10-year ban from any governance role in a residential community. The civil suit wrapped soon after. We didn't just win, we rewrote the rules. Willow Creek Hills now had a new charter, term limits, and mandatory annual audits. The HOA board was replaced with a hired management company overseen by a rotating committee of residents. The rose bushes? I replaced them with native wildflowers. Less delicate, more resilient, like the neighborhood had become. As for me, I went back to fixing engines and helping neighbors hang drywall. Only now, when people passed me on the street, they didn't just wave, they stopped to talk. We weren't afraid anymore. The first time I saw Teresa Thornby in an orange jumpsuit, she was sitting behind a pane of thick glass in the county courthouses holding cell, arms crossed, jaw tight. It wasn't part of some courtroom drama. This was during a required pre-sentencing hearing for community impact statements. I hadn't planned to attend. But Greg called the night before and told me the judge had allowed victims to speak on record before final sentencing. I showed up with my boots dusty from work and a folder tucked under my arm. Inside were photos of the community park before and after her tenure. Dead shrubs, broken irrigation, a child's swing set that had been removed and never replaced. The judge allowed 5 of us to speak. I went last. I held up the photos and addressed the court. "This isn't about flowers," I said. "It started with them, sure. But what she did wasn't personal landscaping preference, it was a long-term campaign to control people through fear. She used her position to punish, not protect. We lost more than money, we lost trust in the place we call home." When I walked out of the courtroom, I didn't look back at Teresa. I had nothing left to say to her. That night, I met with Greg and the newly installed Community Oversight Committee at the local library. It was a modest group, 7 residents, all volunteers, rotating quarterly. The job wasn't glamorous. Reviewing vendor contracts, fielding maintenance priorities, keeping minutes. But it was clean, transparent, and for the first time in years, nobody was looking over their shoulder. "We've got 2 bids for the water runoff project on Hemlock Street," said Mateo, a retired civil engineer who'd taken over infrastructure planning. "Both are under budget, and neither have any ties to former board members." "Let's go with the one that includes the erosion grading," said Lila, a teacher who now ran the budget subcommittee. Long-term savings make more sense. No one argued. No backdoor deals. Just people doing the job. After the meeting, I lingered outside, watching a group of teens skateboard down the newly resurfaced sidewalk. One of them nodded at me. I nodded back. Later that week, I got a call not from Greg, not from the city, but from a woman named Marlene who lived in a neighboring community called Pine Trace. She'd heard about what happened in Willow Creek Hills and asked if I'd be willing to attend a town hall meeting there. Their HOA president had recently passed a new rule banning porch furniture made of anything but natural wood. Fines were already being issued. "It's not about the furniture," she said. "It's about control." I knew that tone. I agreed to attend. At the Pine Trace meeting, I didn't give a speech. I just answered questions. "How did you get people to speak up?" one man asked. "Truth and evidence," I said. "And we never let them divide us." A woman in the back raised her hand. "Weren't you afraid they'd retaliate?" "They tried," I said. "But they only win if you let fear keep you quiet. Once the first person speaks up, others follow. That's always how it starts." Afterward, 3 residents approached me with documentation, photographs of unapproved citations, emails with veiled threats about non-compliance patterns, and screenshots of altered records. I told them what to do: document everything, organize quietly, go to city code enforcement first. Don't post online. Don't tip anyone off too early. Start with the paper trail, I said. You'll need it. Back in Willow Creek Hills, things were changing fast. The community garden, which had been neglected for 2 years, was finally being restored. 2 neighbors volunteered to coordinate it with a local nursery. The HOA's former storage shed, once used to hoard outdated supplies, was being converted into a tool library for residents. I donated my old power washer to it. One afternoon, while replacing a gutter on my garage, I saw a truck pull into Teresa's old driveway. A young couple stepped out, holding a lease agreement and a baby carrier. They introduced themselves Luis and Ria, both nurses moving in from the city. They had no idea about the history of the house. I didn't tell them. Instead, I offered them a hand unloading boxes and told them which day's trash pickup came. "You'll like it here," I said. "We take care of each other now." The next community meeting was held on the clubhouse lawn. Folding chairs, iced tea, and a whiteboard propped on a picnic table. No power plays. Just neighbors planning a neighborhood cleanup and voting on which local artist to commission for a mural on the retaining wall near the entrance. Cindy leaned over during the meeting and nudged a small envelope toward me. "What's this?" "City sent it to me, but it's addressed to you," she said. "I think it's from the Office of Civic Recognition." Inside was a letter of appreciation, signed by the mayor, acknowledging exceptional resident leadership in preserving ethical governance and community integrity. I didn't need a plaque. Never cared about that. But I kept the letter. Later, I planted a new row of flowers along the side of my fence, not roses this time. Something tougher, drought-tolerant, low-maintenance, and bright. A neighbor kid walked by with his mom and pointed at them. "Those are cool." "What are they?" "Coneflowers," I said. "They come back every year, even after a rough winter." He grinned and ran ahead. By the end of the month, Teresa had been transferred to a state correctional facility. Her restitution payments were being handled through a garnishment system, though most of that money would go into the community fund. She had no chance of appealing, not with the paper trail, the audit, and the 23 residents who testified under oath. As for the other former board members who had turned a blind eye, they signed legal agreements barring them from ever holding administrative roles in any homeowner association in the state. That was part of the settlement Greg negotiated. They avoided prison, but their reputations were permanently stained. The neighborhood newsletter, which used to be a propaganda sheet, was now run by a rotating group of middle schoolers as part of a school project. The last issue included a comic strip about recycling, a recipe for zucchini bread, and a feature on the mural's progress. One evening, I got a call from Greg. He was wrapping up the last pieces of the civil cases paperwork. "You know," he said, "I've worked on a lot of these cases. Usually they end with a check and a shrug. This one was different. It wasn't just about money. No, it wasn't. It was about fixing something that was broken and making sure it stayed fixed." We said our goodbyes and hung up. That night, I sat on my porch, a cold drink in hand, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. The air was quiet. Not the nervous kind of quiet that used to hang over the neighborhood like fog, but real calm. The kind that says, "This place is home again." I looked toward the side yard where the old roses once stood. It didn't sting anymore. What had been destroyed had grown into something better. Not because we'd fought hard, but because we'd refused to stay quiet. And that, I realized, was the real victory.